welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. We are here at the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport, a fantastic facility. I'm here with Kathleen Mayer, the executive director and also the curator of this fine place. First of all, thank you for having us here.
Thank you for coming. We're delighted.
It is great to be here. So why don't we start, for those who have never been here before. The name Barnum may sound familiar to people, but we'll get into that. Let's talk about the Barnum Museum.
Barnum Museum actually is a National Historic Landmark. It has been since the 1970s, basically because of the Barnum legacy, but as well as the magnificent architecture of the building. It certainly is Bridgeport's iconic building.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's go, how did it all start? We need to go back to Mr. Barnum's history, way back when, before really it all started, right?
Yeah, well, you know, what's interesting about P.T. Barnum, everybody in the world can immediately connect with P.T. Barnum.
Right.
And very often people aren't quite sure and they automatically go right to the circus,
right,
understandably, because his name is still associated to the circus. But interestingly, the circus was his retirement project.
That was the end of the road, so to speak. There was so much that occurred before that, right?
Right, and all of that stuff, the circus couldn't have happened unless all of that happened prior to the creation of the enterprise that we still know today as Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. So it was Barnum, who was born in 1810. He's a lot earlier than people think.
Yeah.
He was born in 1810. And to give you some context, the country, you know, that early was very small.
Right, it doesn't, certainly not the way it is now.
It certainly wasn't. Yeah. There was no Western territory at that point. And
states looked different.
States looked different, people's thinking was different, and the whole idea, the whole concept of a democratic nation was brand new. There was no, definable lines for it yet. The founding fathers, some of them were still alive at that point.
Right.
So
he might have hung out with John Hancock for all you know.
Well, he was a staunch, as he grew, he was a staunch Jacksonian Democrat. He believed in the common man, and he fought and he championed a lot of the rights that we have today. Freedom of the press.
Right.
You know, he was all about those principles really becoming embodied in society. Mm-hmm. So he's born in 1810 in Bethel, Connecticut. He is a Connecticut boy.
He is a Connecticut boy, and that's important. A local guy, the name is known worldwide, and Connecticut is featured as a part of that.
Connecticut is featured as a part of it, and it's really the museum's job today to make sure his vast legacy is recognized with all of the contributions that he made. So that's really what we champion here, is that people understand. People don't realize that he knew everybody. When we have guests that will come from Prague, they will come from Russia, China. We are a global institution, and people from all over the world do also connect with Barnum's name. And interestingly, if you said Abraham Lincoln in this country, we all know what Abraham Lincoln did, the whole story. But if you say Abraham Lincoln in Sweden or in Belgium, people don't know that.
Right.
They know Barnum.
Right.
Barnum was there. Barnum left traces when he traveled all over the world.
And it's not just the circus aspect that people know him from in those other countries. It's earlier beginnings.
Oh, in the UK, it's Jenny Lind, a coloratura soprano. Barnum was the first one to bring high art to the American shores. Opera, theater did not exist in this country. And wonderfully, what Barnum does first, his love and his passion, his life always went back to his American Museum in New York City, Lower Broadway. If you go all the way downtown where the Woolworth building is today, that's as far down as the American Museum was, because that's all New York was at that time. Didn't even get to 14th Street then. Yeah. So the American Museum opens. It's huge. There are about 500,000 exhibitions inside the museum. And the idea of a museum also didn't exist.
There was no definition for what a museum was back then, right?
Exactly. When you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art today, you go left, it's Egypt, you go right, it's Rome. You know what you're going to see. Museums at that time were more high society. They were salons, they were libraries or archives lots of times. It wasn't a place for massive or the masses exhibitions.
Yeah.
So what Barnum introduced to the American Museum was the first aquarium really to exist.
No kidding.
There were whale tanks in the basement. And this is in the 1840s.
Wow.
The museum opens in 1842. So the idea of aquatic sciences really didn't exist yet. They brought whales in from Labrador. They were in the basement. They were pumping water in from the East River. Okay,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
yes.
Well, I'm sure the river wasn't as bad as it is these days.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but it was used. The East
Yeah.
River was a vital part of industry and commerce in the 19th century. So they had whale tanks, the aquatic sciences begin. Inside the museum was really a zoo.
Yeah.
So they were importing monkeys and birds and large animals.
So that's sort of
inside.
The genesis of what the circus ended up being
So,
later on.
well, a zoo.
Yeah,
Because
a zoo,
Barnum
yeah.
later on in life was really one of the instrumental voices to establish the National Zoo in Washington. So he loved animals, but also very important to understand too, this is a very, very early part of history. Theater going was not acceptable to all audiences. When Barnum was at the American Museum, he created.
Did they not understand it, or was it just not their
It
thing,
was
or was it?
behavior.
Okay.
Theater going was predominantly attended by men. There was drinking, there was smoking, there was poor behavior
Okay.
that was taking place. It was not a place for family audiences. It was not a place for women
high
and children.
society in general.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not in this country at all. So Barnum, brilliant, recognizes there's an entire audience that's not being tapped into yet. He said, let's create a theater that's appropriate for women, that's appropriate for children, and put wholesome entertainment in there. Now, people also don't think of Barnum as wholesome entertainment. It absolutely was. So the Moral Lecture Hall is created, and it's an elaborate theater. I mean, there's gilding, there's painted prosceniums and beautiful. He was very conscientious of creating a wonderful environment, not just benches and chairs. He created an experience for people to go in, and then a lot of the performances that took place there had to be a kind of experience that was appropriate for the genteel. So Romeo and Juliet, nobody dies.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Okay. Changes the story a bit.
It changes the story
Yeah.
completely. And that was okay. Uncle Tom's Cabin with a happy ending, because that was a controversial read
Right.
at that time. That started the American Civil War.
So they weren't ruffling any feathers, rocking any boats, so to speak.
It was completely appropriate to that audience because this was all new. There were no rules. There was no definition to what you could do, but it created family entertainment.
Right.
And that's the first time you see it. So when you think of Barnum, you think of the circus. Well, it's more than the circus.
Much more.
It's the whole concept of global family entertainment.
Because when you think of the circus now, I mean, they're human performers, but you think of animals too, a lot of the performers.
Mm-hmm.
He started out with the exact opposite. I know you talked about, the animals that he loved and the whale tanks and stuff like that, but the human performance is the theater.
Mm-hmm.
It was about the humans as much as it was anything else. Yeah.
It absolutely was. It was everything. And one thing we were talking about earlier was what I realized as I started getting more and more immersed in Barnum history is because this is early America and there wasn't a lot of travel and you can just jump on a plane and go anywhere, Barnum actually hired advanced men and emissaries to travel all over the world and bring, whether they were artifacts or relics or people, back to the American Museum to be attractions. So Barnum would actually hire families from Japan or China or Germany or a Scandinavian country that would come and wear their traditional clothing and their music and their language and their customs and engage with the visitors to the American Museum.
And this is the first time that a lot of these Americans were exposed to this kind of culture,
Totally.
or any of the cultures that were performing.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it was a fascination. It was a wonder.
It was an education.
It was an education. And today, it's Epcot.
Yeah,
That's
that's what it
exactly
is,
what
yeah.
Epcot is, the World Showcase today. Barnum was doing the World Showcase in the 1840s and into the 1860s. So it was giving people this exposure. And I'm glad you said education because Barnum's mission statement, his philosophy, was instructive entertainment.
Now, things really, it all came together because what he was passionate about, there was no market for yet at that time. So what he wanted to do could so easily be, because nobody else was doing it. He loved it. Nobody else was doing it. It all came together, didn't it?
It all came together. He was brilliant. I mean, the fact that he saw that. We had a terrific scholar working with us at one point. He said he must have been a time traveler. How could he have figured all of that out? But he did. And one thing, and this is a good point you make too, he was traveling with Tom Thumb in Europe in the 1840s, and Tom Thumb was just a magnificent performer. And just as an aside, he and Tom Thumb and P.T. Barnum stayed friends throughout their entire lives and are actually even buried across from each other here in Bridgeport.
Wow.
Yeah. But when Barnum was traveling all over Europe with Tom Thumb, he had heard about the Swedish nightingale, a coloratura soprano from Sweden. And he was captivated. Barnum even says in his own words that he preferred a higher grade of entertainment that he saw in Europe than what the American Museum had.
Were they considered more cultured in Europe?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so we were a bunch of vagabonds that just came over.
Well, there was nothing else to do but to look towards, the fashionable tastes of Europe. I mean, that actually never stopped, even after the American, the Revolution, back in the 18th century. So people were still looking at those wonderful cultural forms and bringing them to America and transforming them a little, shaking them up, throwing them at the wall, seeing actually how you make it an American style. We still do that today.
Right, yeah,
we still do that today.
Let's take a break and come back because we've got a lot more to get to. Why don't you give out the website for people to go and learn more?
Yes, if you could come to the Barnum-Museum.org website, you can see all the programs that we have coming up. Certainly, through all the way in through the spring, that we've got all types of lectures and family entertainment coming. And certainly, the museum is open on Thursdays and Fridays with some great up-close information about so many of the artifacts that we have at the museum.
We'll put a graphic up of the website on the screen as well. Kathleen Mayer, the Executive Director and Curator of the Barnum Museum. We'll take a break and come back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. We are here at the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport. Kathleen Mayer is the Executive Director and also the Curator. And we're just going to get right back into it. I think we'll fast forward a little bit for purposes of time, maybe to the end of the American Museum. Okay, that good spot?
Oh, perfect spot.
Okay.
Yeah, well, the American Museum was really America's major attraction for over 20 years. And more people were actually visiting the American Museum than lived in New York City at the time.
No kidding. Wow.
So it was truly, the place to go that everybody knew about.
Does it work only in a place where obviously New York wasn't what it is now then population-wise, but do you need that kind of citywide kind of population to make something like the American Museum work?
Oh, absolutely. You need that critical mass. You need that economic vitality. And Barnum knew that. And all cities today even know that. I mean, Barnum was really as much of an urban planner and urban thinker. So that's why it all came together and worked. And even with Bridgeport, he's the author of Bridgeport's Real Industrial Age. And so all of the advantages in this city to actually be the developer for a big chunk of the East Side and bringing the industries in. So yeah, you definitely do need that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, what's interesting, talking about towards the end of the American Museum, is Barnum did become very political. He actually was, he pulled his candidacy for the governor in 1850s because of the Nebraska-Kansas debates. He became very political, which ultimately led to the demise of the American Museum. He was a passionate voice for the Union cause during the Civil War, and right after the war, the American Museum burned down. And he found out he was on the floor, the House of Representatives. He was the representative for the town of Fairfield, actually.
Okay, wow.
He had so much land. And he was speaking about the railroad barons. He was stymieing Commodore Vanderbilt, so he knew Vanderbilt as well.
Right.
A notice slipped to him while he's on the floor, and he opens it, and the American Museum was up in flames.
Foul play?
They believe, it's suspected, that it was burnt by Southern sympathizers.
No kidding.
So there was a hit list of 12 sites in New York.
And he was one of them?
and the American Museum was one of them. And it was reported that 4 different people saw a fire starting in 4 different places in the American Museum, and it was a total loss.
Now, I would say, like, if he didn't get involved in politics, would that not have ever happened? But you can't, a person has to be who they are. And if he evolved, I would imagine early on he wasn't as politically active. It didn't seem, he was more passionate about what he was envisioning and then having that come to fruition. But you can't change who a person is. If you are evolving into that political person, you can't stymie that. You can't stifle it.
He was high profile.
Yeah.
It's exactly how things happen today. I mean, it's high profile. You're going to get the recognition. He started off in politics very early. He went to jail for libel. He was writing to the Danbury newspapers, and they wouldn't print any of his editorials, and he started his own newspaper. So fine, I'll start my own.
Wow. And
he was sued 4 times for libel. Last time landed him in jail, and people were outraged because they felt that he had the right in a democratic society to speak his mind, and they decorated his jail cell. He kept producing the newspaper, and they had a party for him in Bethel.
And freedom of press.
Freedom of press.
Right.
Speech, all of that. Barnum championed all of that. We live today because he went to jail.
Yep.
For those rights.
And his American Museum had to get burned down.
His American Museum had to get burned down.
What did he do after that? Because he didn't seem like the type of person that would just go away, sure.
You're absolutely right. He called that chapter in his autobiography Rest But Not Rust.
Right.
And he immediately opened a second museum just up the street, not as big. And a big part of that, he speaks passionately because his employees, there was no compensation for people back then.
Yeah.
And there were fundraisers at the Winter Garden at Niblo's theaters to support the families of the people he employed. He got the second museum opened up fast.
How do you get all those replacement artifacts, exhibitions, everything?
People all over the world.
He knew everybody, yeah.
He did this without a computer.
How do you do that? That's impossible.
You know something? Yeah. I think about it, it's like I've worked for this man, for 16 years, and he's the only man that exhausts me.
How did the world exist without the internet, right?
He did it.
Yeah.
He was just brilliant, and he was tireless, and he made it all work. And then that second museum lasted barely 3 years. A boiler failure caused the complete burning of the second museum.
There's no foul play there. Just,
no foul play there. No.
Bad.
He is one of the founding members of the New York City Municipal Fire Department.
No kidding. Wow. Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's move on now to what people might be a little bit more familiar with, and that, of course, is the greatest show on earth,
Greatest show, that is exactly right, the greatest show on earth. So after the second museum burnt down, he decided to go out west, because now there's west to go visit. He went on a buffalo hunt with Custer.
Wow, he knew everybody.
He knew everybody. Wow. He actually said that was wanton butchery. He didn't like that at all. But it got him out west and into California, where he's approached by a couple of Midwestern circus promoters, and Barnum writes, "It will revive my love of my museums," and he decides to create the greatest show on earth.
He seemed like, he mentioned the barbaric aspect of the buffalo hunting.
Yeah.
He seemed like an animal lover. But
yes.
Circuses, the circuses these days, the ones that use animals, are a little bit frowned upon by, people who, have the animals' interests at heart.
I'm glad you brought that up, because another person that Barnum knew is Henry Bergh. Most people don't know who Henry Bergh is. Henry Bergh is the founder of the ASPCA.
No kidding.
And
wow.
he became very good friends with Bergh, and also writes that he goes, "I love my animals far too much to harm them." And there are letters between Bergh and Barnum, where Barnum's, associates, regulating what they were doing with the animals in the performances. So we have those letters, and believe it or not, if you're familiar with Bridgeport and beautiful Seaside Park, if you head down to Seaside Park, where Conti's building is, leading to University of Bridgeport, there's a wonderful statue of a horse, a little horse. Barnum actually had that dedicated to Henry Bergh when Bergh actually passed away before Barnum. So Barnum actually erected a statue to honor the memory of the founder of the ASPCA. So he was a passion, and he contributed. He was a contributor to the cause.
Did Bergh, the ASPCA guy, was he willing to accept what Barnum was doing? Was he approving of what
They-
Barnum was doing with the animals?
They were. If there was something that he didn't approve of, he got into Barnum's face, and they worked it out. I mean, there was communication and dialogue, and and we still live with that today.
Right.
So there was serious recognition. But again, none of those regulations existed before the late 1860s. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, so Barnum was instrumental in forming this movement to make sure animal care and preservation was acknowledged.
Yeah, and zoos have evolved into more of a, like you're in the cage observing them in their natural habitat.
Exactly. A perfect example of that is Disney World's Animal Kingdom Lodge.
You're going around and
you really are in the cage, and you don't realize it. I mean, that's how brilliant they are down there, that you go out and you're in your hotel room and you're looking out at this expansive area, these acres and acres of animals walking around, and you're looking at them, and they can walk up and walk by.
You're in
and
there.
It's like you're in there, you're in the cage.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, they're brilliant.
Yeah, that's the way it should be.
That's brilliant.
That's the way it should
be.
How did it go from Barnum, the guy you know from the circus, to Barnum and Bailey, and then later on Ringling Brothers and all that?
So the greatest show on earth is incepted and created in 1872. Actually, on my birthday, it was April 30th, 1872. Well, that year isn't my birthday,
because you look great, by the way, if that's true.
But so it's the 1870s is the first time you see these massive traveling shows. Opens in Brooklyn, the tented show, 10,000 seats under a tent, and there were multiple tents. The show never traveled without a museum tent and a fine art tent. So he always had his museum component traveling with the shows. And they were spectaculars. It wasn't quite the way we go and see a circus today.
Right.
A lot of these things were massive pageants where there would be huge chariot races. I mean, the horses, the idea of the equestrian was a big part of the early stages of the circus the way we know it today. So that concept really comes under the tent. And then what Barnum goes ahead and does, he wants a home again. He wants a place. So he negotiates with Vanderbilt, even though he fought him with the train monopolies.
Right. But that's politics.
That's politics.
Right.
Let's say business and politics.
Right.
So he rents the one quadrant, the northeast quadrant of Madison Square to create a hippodrome, which is really part of the greatest show on earth. And they would have these enormous spectaculars of Nero's chariot races and all types of patriotics. So it all had a location. So the Hippodrome was created at Madison Square, which today,
yep, there you go.
It's in its third location, but Madison Square Garden, Barnum really started the Madison Square.
We're running short on time, so I just want to change gears here and give you a key word: restoration.
Yes, restoration. We are all about that. Thank you. In 2010, the Barnum Museum was hit by an F1 tornado, totally atypical. It was alarming, certainly.
They don't come around here. We get the hurricanes, not the tornadoes.
And we've had a couple of those too. So we have been in battle mode for the last 3 years. But the tornado hit and caused considerable damage to the historic landmark. We are so lucky that the building stood. That's a real testament to engineering of the 19th century, but the damage is considerable, so we've been working on that. We outloaded 25,000 artifacts. We only lost one artifact.
That's actually a really good track record.
It's unbelievable, and my hat's off to everybody who called and came. We had our colleagues from Mark Twain, the Fairfield Museum, come to help us. Took a year to outload the artifacts, and then now we're really assessing the building. So we're still in the process of raising money. It's multi-millions, but we are also in the process now of re-envisioning the experience, and it's going to be something that Barnum would have done. So that's exciting.
If you've experienced this already, you may see something brand new and exciting if you come at some point in the future.
When we start, we're starting the vision process next week. We've already been really involved with our community and the regional community to create a new vision. So the thing that kept coming up is, what would Barnum have done?
Yeah.
So that's the direction we're going.
That seems like a perfect way to wrap up the show right there.
Perfect way to wrap up.
One more time on the website.
Website is www.barnum-museum.org, and jump onto the website. We do have Twitter, we do have Facebook,
Yep.
we're social
I'm sure there'll
media.
be links all over right to the
Links
website.
everywhere, yes. And do visit downtown Bridgeport. It's a wonderful place. There's great stuff happening in Bridgeport.
Kathleen Mayer, the executive director and the curator of the Barnum Museum, thank you again for having us at your
You
place.
are so welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of For the Record. You can see this show and many others on our YouTube site. In the meantime, I'm Sean Murphy. Take care.